We are live. All right. Hello, beautiful people. We are live. AutoDidactic here, Cambell. And today we have Michelle Gibson and BurnEye, Bernard Conkin. BurnEye, mine's third eye, ScienceGuy, without the bow tie. And today we're going to have a talk about Earth energies and grid systems and get into how they were maybe powering the old world and setting it up basically for free energy, really, I guess is what it gets down to. So we're going to start off with Michelle. She's just put out a recent video on the, I can't remember what it's called, but like basically Earth computer grid energy system thing. But I'll throw it over to you, Michelle. You can explain.
The video that Cambell's referring to is CircuitBoard Earth. And it seemed to be the best title for it, because that is in effect what the Earth is, and all the infrastructure from the ancients was all put together as a circuit board. And a lot of researchers like Michael Tellinger and others have looked at the ancient pyramids as being circuits. And what I've seen in my research, and I'll go into how I got started in all of this in just a moment, is it brings it up into very recent times, this whole concept. So I believe the original civilization evolved the same way we think we did. And when I say that, I mean, it goes back to ancient times, medieval times, Renaissance times, modern times. The thing is that we've been taught that we're like the top of the heap, and we're not. we're managing along, but what I've come to believe is that there was a hostile takeover by malevolent beings of the Earth's grid system for the purpose of power and control, and we're seeing that play out. It's been playing out. We're really seeing it play out with the events of today, with everything that's been going on worldwide, where it's all out in the open, in your face. People that are wide awake and people that are sound asleep, as far as the whole pandemic and the responses to that. And I'm just bringing that up because that's what the agenda is playing out. That was what was planned. But humanity was at a very high level of consciousness and science and technology, and then something happened which knocked us off of that original path. And I'm personally an optimist. I really believe that with this human awakening, we're going to be regaining our sovereignty and claiming our power, and that the beings that are responsible for what's taken place here will be held accountable. That's my personal opinion. I've been studying this subject for a long time. And before I woke up to the original civilization, I have to admit, I was really very, very concerned about the future of humanity. But I have reason for optimism, and in the meantime, I started doing my own research, and what drives me is bringing back this original civilization and how it worked. Like Cambell was saying, the free energy electromagnetic grid system. We're still utilizing aspects of it in our daily lives, but every piece of infrastructure on the Earth was intentional. And I'm not saying this without reason, and I'm going to go into things that I found in my research. But a little bit of my background is I've had a passionate interest in megaliths and ancient civilizations as far back as I can remember. But for most of that time, all we ever had access to was what the mainstream had to say about it, or what conventional literature had to say about it. And that was always kind of disappointing. But then there were books like Chariots of the Gods, Eric von Daniken back in the 70s, and Graham Hancock, and Fingerprints of the Gods. And, there's been alternative literature along the way, but with the internet, finally, there's this cornucopia of information about all of this, juicy topic that wasn't available before. And so my unique discovery was around 2016. I discovered the shape of a star tetrahedron, which is the Star of David, in a map of North America. And the northern tip of it is in BurnEye's country in Edmonton, in Alberta. And I connected a line of dots down to Ottawa, cities in a straight line. And then I managed to connect a line of dots down through the middle of the United States, Toledo and Oklahoma City and on down. And then I connected a line back up to Edmonton. And then I found another triangle or tetrahedron. And so it looks like the Star of David. By that time in my life, again, this was back in 2016, so it wasn't that long ago, so about 5 years ago. I had been studying the alternative researchers for quite a while. I don't know how many of you are familiar with megalithomania, Hugh Newman, and those wonderful presentations. So I'm looking at all those guys, and they're seeing the same thing in South America that they're finding in Turkey, and I'm scratching my head, going, what's up? And so I've been following this stuff for a while, and basically I knew what to do with it, which again is this intentional placement of infrastructure geometrically on the Earth. So when I say geometrically, I mean sacred geometry. And it's like grids within grids. So there's the Earth grids. It's connected to galactic grids. It's geometry. And
like fractal.
It's all in there. It's like this lost knowledge, but more than that, it's this information that's been removed so we wouldn't know it. So we wouldn't understand it. And the controllers have taken full advantage of that. Other teachers have talked about this grid being our consciousness. It's like our shared soul. And so they've done things intentionally on this grid to hurt us as well. And by that I mean, killings and massacres and wars. When I was following the grid lines that I found, it's like World War II was all over the place, and it goes right through Vietnam and Southeast Asia, and they've done a lot of things to keep our consciousness at a low level so we wouldn't wake up. Because what's taken place, they had no right to do, which should be obvious, but they've hidden themselves well by taking over power and control. And so the people that we're taught to worship, the people with the wealth, the spiritual leaders, the royal, what we've been taught are royalty. They've hidden themselves in that, and somehow we're less than. And I'm just trying to come up with words to describe that. We've not been treated very well.
They've built a simple hierarchy with them on the top and us on the bottom. Right,
exactly. I've got a diagram of that.
Is that a foot stepping on a person's head?
Let me see here. Let me see if I can find it first.
And just to interject while you're looking there, Michelle, I couldn't agree more with absolutely everything you just said there, and how by them the controllers removing the knowledge of this micro to macrocosm energy grid and the ancient structures and technology, that is what has essentially disconnected us from our collective consciousness, or what some people call the Akashic records, or like some indigenous call like the dream time or dream consciousness state, or with the ancestors, right? And
Mhm.
that I personally believe, and am trying to theoretically come up with experiments that at some of these ancient alignment sites, that during specific, like today, or yesterday, the summer solstice, or the solstices and the equinoxes, as well as certain eclipses, that it's some sort of advanced technology that opens up energy portals between the realms and the micro to macrocosm that the ancients knew about, and that maybe some elites still use, or not, but that it, some of these structures, ancient sacred structures that are left remaining at these site energy grid sites, nodal points, might still be somewhat functioning. And
Mhm.
I think the best spot, or most likely candidates, would be like in Tibet or Burma. There, what's Burma? Also Myanmar, where they haven't had as much destruction coming in, and still have these giant resonating ancient buildings and temples that are all in sound wave, or wave guide formations, that the buildings are built in, with these stones being the materials of quartz and silica, and the metals, that they are giant macro chip wave guide generators that are pulling in energy or broadcasting out energy still to this day.
Right. I totally agree. And, the issue, I think, and I'm going to talk about this tonight, is that we were in unity consciousness. So for anybody that's concerned about collective consciousness, this is not our natural state of being. We had to be manipulated to be divided the way that we've become, and in many ways messed up the way that our society, appears to be. That's been deliberately done, because true human beings aren't like that. It's like, over the decades, I don't know how many people are familiar with Drunvalo Melchizedek, but there have been several periods of people starting to wake up. And every time people started to wake up, something happened. And so when you look at the decade of the 60s, and
Yep.
the flower power and the hippie culture and love, what happens? You've got the Mansons,
How fast
the
did that
Manson
destroy
family.
that?
You've got the drugs coming in. You've got Vietnam.
If you look at 1969 to like 1971, it's like the hippies and flower power, and like literally 2 years later, it's cocaine and disco. It's bizarre.
Yeah. And again, unfortunately, there's, a lot of agencies behind the scenes that are like government agencies, and CIA, and, others like that. They've been actually involved in this. And I read, Peter Moon is an author that was one of my guides along the way, and he's put out a number of books, and it's more like stream of consciousness to me when I read it. So I learned a lot from his books, but I couldn't tell you what book it was in and where to find it. But he brought out a lot of really interesting information. He was involved with Scientology before it became what Scientology is today. And Scientology at the beginning was about freeing humanity and liberating the soul and learning how to access higher consciousness. And then that got hijacked too. But his story is interesting because he was in it before that happened, and he was a young man. And there were a couple of things in his books that I can pull out because it kind of relates to my own journey. And one is that he made a statement in one of his books that Earth had been on a different timeline, and that got hijacked. Again, I couldn't tell you what book it was in. I'm reading that, and I had been studying some spiritual things. I learned about ascension. I'm thinking, okay, well, we're all going to come together and everything's going to be hunky dory. And then I read that. And I'm like, wait a minute, what? And then there were some other things that he talked about, and one of them was the CIA's involvement in, going way back. If you look up a picture of the British East India Company flag, this is a good one. I'm just going to pull this up real quick. I was looking for the pyramid that shows like most of humanity at the bottom of the pyramid, and above that are the corporations, the Trilateral Commission, you go up towards the top and you've got all of these, bigger institutions, and, the mass of humanity is down at the bottom.
Stuck in a pyramid scheme from the very beginning is how they've structured it.
Exactly.
And they've also manipulated us with generational trauma that has divided us and caused everyone to essentially genocide and lose their own like ancient cultures and like societies and teachings, and instead turn to the continued cycle of abuse and trauma within their own communities. And it's what's going to make or break us. But like you, Michelle, especially with all the developments over the last year and a half since these lockdowns, that the reset is the reawakening of consciousness, and that we have all signs show we've transformed into the new age, and that age is the consciousness waking up, and that we are going to win. We're going back to a unified people that realize that it's better to be honest with ourselves and then being able to be honest with everyone else, as opposed to that hidden away fear, as well as also ego, I guess, that each individual is the everything and better than anyone else, right?
Yep. And I just want to point out, Van der Zwaan is talking about the Dutch East India Company, which was the wealthiest corporation of all time. If you put all the wealthiest ones together, it was still wealthier than all of those. And so I guess you could call the Dutch East India Company is like a trailblazer, and the whole idea of multinational corporation and all that. But the British East India Company was like the first, and it was what got the British Empire going. And I'm going to go ahead and share the screen because it was from Peter Moon's work that I learned about the what the British East India Company flag looked like, as well as the role of like the CIA, and that's the one that comes to mind. But these other background organizations and the role that they've had in drug running, and I mean, this is on up to the present day. It's not hidden information. I mean, you can look up CIA and drug running and you'll find something. It may not be covered by the mainstream so much, but it's there. So I'm just going to show you. This is the British East India Company flag right there.
Wow. I had never seen that. That's amazing, Michelle.
What do they call that? BurnEye or something?
It's like, where'd Old Glory come from, right? And that was, that was like a big clue to me that there's, something really wrong with this picture, and something really wrong with the narrative.
They're just a virus. You can see what they've done. They've just creeped in and taken over with, deception and all this, and severing our connection. It's like as soon as we're born, they step in and, cut the connection to mum, don't they? And then they spend the rest of our lives trying to cut every other connection to nature that they can, and lay over their facade. And then, they take away the knowledge, and then they start whispering all these other untruths, and that starts people fighting, and you're right, I'm wrong, and all this. And then somehow they get us to believe that going to foreign countries and killing people we've never met and have never come and threatened us is the way to stay safe. I mean, it's
Right.
literally straight out of 1984. I mean, they've given us the playbook. It's bizarre.
And that's they have the playbook. They, the playbook is known, and it's all they have. Which is deception, murder, and mayhem. It's all they have because they can't touch us themselves. They had to create the cataclysm, and I believe that we're talking about a deliberately caused cataclysm, which is known primarily as the mud flood. It could have been one big event. It could have been several smaller events that wiped out this original civilization. There's plenty of underground infrastructure where not only could the controllers have lived, but original people lived. Until enough infrastructure was dug out, they restarted civilization and gave us the narrative that we are taught from cradle to grave in our schools, in our movies, in our books, in our music, so that we all have the same narrative. So they rely on people not noticing what's right in front of them. And then when people start noticing
hidden in plain sight.
When people start noticing it, and I think this is happening in our community, there's ideas introduced to sow seeds of doubt. And to me, a big example is world fairs as original infrastructure. Well, that's getting out there. So now the internet's being flooded with these world fairs being built. Okay. If you look at it, and there's so many examples of this just incredibly massive, beautiful, ornate infrastructure all over the world. I mean, when we think of Tasmania, we think of I know, as an American, watching cartoons when I was a kid, and the Tasmanian devil in Looney Tunes. That's what I think of when I think of Tasmania. Hobart had a world fair. Hobart had a world fair. Hobart had a trolley.
And Tasmania still has under 1 million people in the whole state. It's not a big place, especially population-wise. It never has been. And they had the big domes and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the convicts built it all.
Mm-hmm. So the big thing is they want us to believe that all of these massive, beautiful structures were built temporarily, and that after these world fairs, they were destroyed. Most of the buildings were destroyed. And I think they were showcasing the original civilization before they destroyed it. And they hid away the technology, or they used the technology. I mean, the 1876 Philadelphia Centennial World's Fair, the massive engines that they had, the Corliss engine, and, it powered the machinery hall. Well, where in the heck did we have the technology, just 12 years after the end of the American Civil War, when supposedly we were, just above, brutality with, riding horseback and, very primitive medicine with people having their legs amputated, all that stuff. So that's the story we're given. And then, voila, within a short period of time, all of a sudden we have the capability of building this monumental architecture. And
all the manufacturing, because when you see the photos of inside these exhibitions, they're jam-packed. It's not like a normal store. It's like they're jam-packed full of stuff. Like, it's literally like someone's gone and just stolen everything from the houses or something and just whacked it all in this exhibition. And it was like it's almost like a trophy ceremony, I guess, for the victors, right? It's like, the spoils of war kind of thing. But like I said, there's these massive machines, but where did they build them? In such a short time, apart from having the technology, where did they manufacture them? Because you might have an idea, but then you've got to make all the machines that make that machine. It's, it just doesn't make sense.
And also that lots of the quote unquote robber barons that are designated as the builders of these original leftover advanced structures. It's like their acknowledged class of people was quote unquote robber baron in the 1800s when they were coming to America and making their fortunes. So clearly they were digging stuff out, finding stuff, sanitizing it for the regular folk to come in after they genocide the remaining remnants of the old civilization that had survived the reset or the catastrophe. And then from there, after they'd taken it all, showcased it to the elite group that's controlling and manipulating, then hit it. And after that is when we see this rush in of all of those orphan trains and the settlers and everything else, right? So it makes perfect sense that's most likely what happened for sure.
And that they weren't actually building anything new. They were reclaiming it and digging out the Bureau of Reclamation. You see that? You know, and that just
the Bureau of Reclamation. What?
Yeah. So there was a whole.
Is that a real thing?
Yeah, there's a Bureau of Reclamation in the United States, probably other countries as well. So, you know, they've just given this false narrative, and they really don't like humanity. They're not, you know, human beings are special, and they are jealous of our souls. We have something they don't have, so they're trying to get everything synthetically.
Yep.
And you know, like I said, they can't touch us, so they have to get inside our heads, which they've done. And you know, thankfully, we're waking up with the internet and connections and finding each other, and you know, people doing their own things, getting their own information. Mine's intuitive, and that's, you know, one thing that I really look forward with BurnEye, because he's got a science background for things that I'm seeing intuitively and really have a good picture in my head of what was really going on here before this took place. And BurnEye's got the background with a lot of the scientific thinkers that have gotten suppressed, like Walter Russell, Royal Rife. There are others that made huge breakthroughs. You know, Nikola Tesla, I guess, is probably the best known in science. But, you know, everything we're all connected, you know, and so the biggest question is how is that possible? And when you get into the science of it, and you get into Greg Braden was somebody that I encountered early in my journey, and he's a spiritual teacher, and he talked about the holographic universe. And that, you know, you get into the fractals there, Cambell. And so we're all, you know, we're all the same being. All life is connected. And all the same codes, the DNA codes. I mean, you know, there's so many different interconnections with all life, and, you know, not just on Earth, but in the universe. And so we're taught, you know, we're the highest example of evolution that's ever been on this rock hurtling through space. We don't know if there's other life out in the universe. You know, we've been terribly, misinformed and disinformed and lied to. So we're sitting here going, you know, trying to make sense of it all without the proper perspective.
Exactly.
Yeah. Mm.
You know, and then division being created.
And that's what they do. You turn the foundation. Yeah.
You know,
like if you change the foundation of learning in that, then, you know, well, look what's happening now. Like, they're literally getting people to off themselves. You know, I mean, how do you win a war, right? That's the easiest way. Just get your enemy to kill itself. But as you say, this is all offer and acceptance. All of it is offer and acceptance. We have to accept, you know, that they can't there seem to be rules that they have to play by, but even though they bend them very, very badly, but in the end, it's, this whole thing about the jabby jab, it's all people are accepting it. They're making a decision, and so that way, how do you complain about that?
And just to clarify, I'm not saying I believe that we're on a rock flying through space. I'm saying that's what we're taught.
Exactly.
I was wondering.
That is what we're taught.
Seeing all the comments pop up.
And we don't know how we got here, and all of this information. Where I really believe that the original civilization, the original humanity, had no question about who we were, who we really are, where we really came from, what the nature of this realm was, all the science behind it. They knew all of that. And none of this guessing and polarization of information. So either you're right or wrong with the shape of the world or whatever. Okay. My work is driven by the alignments that I found. It's not driven by whether the Earth is a plane or a planet. I have encountered evidence for the manipulation of our perception of space and time. And ley lines were originally on maps. They disappeared. Mercator was a globe maker, so he was famous for his map, and then he was also a globe maker. There's definitely information in the historical record for tampering with that whole idea of the shape of the Earth and time.
Why wouldn't they? Whatever it is, they've tampered with our perception of everything else. Why would they leave where we are, where we live? There's no way they would leave. That would be the first thing that you would think that they would attack, is just to get us totally disconnected. Because if you don't know where you are, how can you be connected to it properly? And it's like I said, the ancients seemed to just work with what was here, and they integrated because they understood it. And now we've been told, oh, no, it's not energy. It's just all little particles. Just break everything down, to chemicals and all this kind of stuff. But, that's all about money and patenting. That's the only reason they do that. That's the reason why doctors don't say, I'll go home and drink water and go for a walk, every day. Take these pills instead, because it's money-based. And we didn't used to be money-based, because there's no way we could have built these structures that are all over the place if it was a money-based society. It just would not work. It was a contribution-based society, which is like what Michael Tellinger talks about with Ubuntu and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, we were definitely thinking differently, which meant we saw the world differently, and that's what they've changed. That's what they've attacked, is our perception, which is our filter, I guess, between what we are and the physical world. We have this filter of perception, and they've just tampered with that so that we literally see different, interpret things differently.
And consciousness is everything. So if you have an understanding of the nature of consciousness and how to utilize consciousness, it's a huge key to our existence. And in our culture, we're given drugs that are depressants, alcohol, cigarettes. You can have as much of that as you want. And they criminalize, drugs or whatever. We've got some kind of bug flying around here. The consciousness enhancing, the things that give us connections with other dimensions and other realms. And Graham Hancock talks about that in his work. They want control of our consciousness, and they want our consciousness at the lowest level possible, so that they can control our behavior and our thoughts.
Well, look at the US at the moment. In many states, you can go to a strip club and go to a bottle shop, but you can't go to church. So it's kind of, it's the playing out, I think, of
what was originally planned. And I like I said, I can't believe that they're going to get away with this. And I think things are happening in the background. It just hasn't become publicly visible yet, but we'll see. But I do want to share, since I've got my screen share going, I do want to share my latest offering. And honestly, this was my research along the ley lines and alignments, which is what most of my research is based on, has brought me to this information. And so this was actually easy for me to put together because most of the research I've already done. And I had these ideas rolling around in my head
making the connections.
A while.
So it's the circuit board city stuff?
Yeah, it's the circuit board Earth.
Circuit board.
And
because what I found interesting when I listened to your last interview with BurnEye was when he was saying it's macro, like where everything we've got now is like, microchips, but they used to have macro. It was the same thing, just on a big scale. And like, I guess we literally were living in the circuit. And so, yeah. And you brought up all these terms that we still use, like battery and terminal and all these electric terms that we use for buildings. And what does that mean, right? So I'll let you get into it.
Okay, and I'll just scroll through this. This is my blog. I'm a writer and researcher, so that's my strongest suit. Is really being able to get into the flow of doing this work, and it is a flow. My research started with my data points from the alignments that I found. But it's really easy for me to do this. And the most time consuming part is doing the research and then putting it together. But this isn't a difficult process for me. So what I am finding is that we're told in our everyday language what the function was of specific infrastructure on the Earth, which was arranged as a circuit board for the once free energy generating electromagnetic grid system of the ancient advanced civilization all over the Earth. Okay, so we're told what the functions are in this infrastructure, and I'm going to go over that. And I like to define terms. It helps me kind of get a clearer picture in my own mind of what we're really talking about. So a circuit board is a physical piece of technology that allows for the assembly of electrical circuits or data circuits on a horizontal layer of material. Okay, so a lot of researchers are looking at this whole idea of a mud flood, which I wasn't aware of until after I started blogging and making videos, and somebody connected me with somebody in the mud flood community. And once I saw that, I'm like, we're looking at the same information, and it has definitely become a very important part of what I believe has taken place here. But then when you really get into the rebuilt narrative or the reconstructed narrative, there's some really glaring examples of what's been going on here. And so, you look at this really tall building in New York City called the Gallinder Building. It was said to have been completed in 1897 and already destroyed in 1910. So they would have built that to only have it stand for 13 years. And that's one example of countless examples. Madison Square Garden, this early version, I couldn't find a construction date, but it was said to have been demolished in 1926. And then this type of tower here is very common all over the world with the 3 windows and the portals. The Astor Hotel in New York City was said to have been built in 1904 and then demolished by 1967. Again, this beautiful architecture. Just so criminal what's taking place here. You get into the Singer Building here. It was demolished in 1986. We're going to be talking about terminals. The Hudson Terminal, a rail station built in 1909 and closed in 1971 and then later demolished. Some of this amazing architecture still stands, probably quite a bit of it, but I think a lot more has been demolished. It's no longer with us. And I'll be going into some other examples. And then this Brooklyn Savings Bank was said to have been built in 1894, and then it was demolished in 1964. So they're tearing all of this old infrastructure down, and then what they replace it with is, vastly inferior quality. I mean, I see buildings going up almost overnight made of, plasterboard and plywood, whatever else they use, but it goes up fast, and it's not going to have the enduring qualities that these old masonry buildings have. You've got columns there. It looks like
no
Greco-Roman.
Like houses and buildings are literally just shelters now. Like these were clearly more than just a shelter. There was tech built into them, and if not, then it was just at least beauty, like craftsmanship.
Right. So they were built to last. Very, very much so.
Definitely.
And then talk about banks, because then we get into the electrical terminology in our financial system language, like currency. So banks deal in currency. A river current. You've got river banks. A river current flowing between two river banks. A river is defined as a natural stream of water flowing in a channel. And then I see so-called natural rivers all over the world that have masonry banks. And this is in Leeds, England, the River Aire. And this is just one example of many. Too many to show you in one place. I do have them throughout my blog, but they have masonry banks.
Yeah, they all do. And even the Swan River, in Perth, has them in places. It's bizarre.
Right. So that's why I think you and me, we're so good, because you are able to intuitively connect these things that just don't naturally come to my mind. But that's ingenious with the bank, the current, the currency, battery bank, and all of that. That is truly revolutionary discoveries you are connecting here.
I guess the other part of that is, they've given us this false narrative. Okay, so they want us to believe that so-called rivers are natural. And in places like Leeds, there are canals in Leeds. And the same thing in other communities, like the River Clyde in Scotland. There are canals in Glasgow, along with the River Clyde, but the River Clyde's supposed to be natural, but it's the same thing. It's masonry banks. So they're canal systems. They're very sophisticated canal systems. But who's going to look? Who's going to ask questions? And that's really all it takes, because once you start looking into this, it falls apart. The narrative just crumbles. And so, I encourage people, just look around your own community and look at it with new eyes, because the truth is there. But they've got a story for everything. So, look at your courthouses, the courthouses in your community, or the museums, or the libraries, the older buildings. It'll have an architect, it'll have a construction date. But, if it was built in the late 1800s, could they have built it when they said they did? And, it's just a process of asking questions and just looking differently.
Even when you find the architects, you can never find the builders. What was that, Bernie?
Sorry, Campbell. I believe those dates that they post on these buildings are when they were re-facaded, right? And it's all hidden in plain sight. So it's not their construction date. It's when they put the new facade on the building.
Yeah.
So they're doing something there, and they're covering it up. They're taking credit for something they didn't build. And then you get into electric current, and what's that? It's a stream of charged particles. So you've got a stream of charged particles, and you have a large natural stream, which is a river. And I think these canals were electrified. I think the rails were electrified in this original civilization.
Yeah.
And a lot of rivers have gold in them.
Oh.
So they find gold in rivers as well. So I think that was part of the system that, greased the wheels of the whole thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
To help out the current along. Yeah. Cool.
Correct.
It's interesting that the banks direct the currency, don't they? The currents.
Right. It's all connected to that. So we have electrical charge in, electrical engineering. But we also had that same word in the financial community, a charge. And, it's the cost of a good or service. It's, you charge your credit card. And so what does that do? Well, people get used to charging and deferring, and pretty soon you have a couple $1,000s on your credit card, which means you have to keep working so you can pay off your credit card so you can get credit in the future, right? I mean, it is harvesting energy. Any way you look at it. I mean, the word
credit, and who's the credit going to, right? The word credit.
Mm-hmm.
Who gets the credit for it? It's
it's
just all there.
It's subtly in our language, and I definitely think that they transferred this, originally life-enhancing electromagnetic grid system of the Earth, which was, designed to benefit life, into this control system. And I'm not an expert on the Fitbit, but it seems to be becoming clearer that the Fitbit, there's a map of some kind. You can go look up the map, and it's all lit up from people that are wearing Fitbits all over the Earth. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know what they are. I don't know what the map is. Is that mapping where they're actually moving when they've got the Fitbit turned on, like where they're exercising kind of thing?
Yeah, and there was a huge thing about it a few years ago that all these U.S. military people were wearing it, not realizing it. So it was exposing them on these maps to secret U.S. bases. That's how Fitbit tracking got famous, and it was in the news.
Wow.
I can't think of the name of the map.
So
there's a map. It's a specific map. I mean, if you look it up, it's like the whole world is lit up with everybody that has a Fitbit or using a Fitbit. And that's not what I'm looking for. I mean, it looks like
Strava
that's it.
Fitness app?
That's it. Strava Fitbit map. Strava global the global heat map.
Oh my gosh.
What is that?
That's bizarre. And Canada, what are you doing? Why aren't you exercising in Canada? It's all black.
What?
Well, there's the population.
Get out there and do some.
There you go, Europe.
That's oh my.
What's going on in Australia? Same thing there, right?
Yeah.
New Zealand's all lit up, though.
I'm guessing this is a few years old.
So anyways, so I just wanted to point out, I mean, there's information in there.
Then it's basically collecting data for energy flow of humans, like, us movement and where the energy kind of thing. Because I mean, we are made up of cells, aren't we, right?
And energy. Or I mean, we're energy beings.
And energy, but yeah, the word cells, battery cells and all that kind of stuff, it's the same word. When you look at it again, it's just hidden there. They just make us think that cell, like a body cell, is different to a battery cell, but it's just really something that holds energy.
Yeah. So I don't have a Fitbit. I've never had one. You know, I know people like it because of the information that they're supposed to get out of it, but you know, I would just wonder about what the purpose of this is. What's going on here? And I don't have an answer to that.
You know, and with Facebook, you know, it's out there that Facebook was a US military, you know, invention or whatever program. And literally the day that it shut down on the military, that they closed it down, the next day, it wasn't Facebook, was it? Face something opened up and that turned into Facebook.
Right.
You know, so Mark Zuckerberg, you know, this whole story with Mark Zuckerberg, I mean, that's completely false. He didn't invent anything. It was already, you know, he was just put up as a figurehead.
I want to say it was first called LifeLog or something like that.
Yeah.
So there's a lot
that
of.
Sounds right. I think that was the military name. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of sleight of hand with a lot of this stuff, and you know, I think the power of the internet and social media is that whatever it was designed for, it's also being used for connection and for awakening. So if they originally intended it to be a control device, it's actually having the opposite effect in the bigger picture. Or we wouldn't be having this conversation tonight.
I've always been of the opinion that even if it is ed tech, that we should use it against them. I mean, why wouldn't you? Why would you let them just use it? So definitely.
One of the favorite memes that I've seen this is a couple of years ago is they tried to bury us, but they didn't realize we were seeds.
Seeds. Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah. So
it is.
That's a good reminder.
Yeah, they stuffed up somewhere big, and they know. I think at this point they know. You know, they're all. You know, I mean, obviously they're still putting out the same show on TV to try and make everyone think that everyone's going along with their plan and everyone's good, but there's so much footage. Like, yeah, I think we're getting very close to something going.
Yeah,
people are just fed up. They're starting to just like really see what's going on here, especially with the G7. Should be careful with what I say, I guess, but you know, like just the photos, you know. The press photos where they're all social distancing with their nappies on, and then literally 2 hours later they're all dancing, you know, having a party together. It's like, come on, guys.
Yeah. You know, so it just takes more and more people to say enough is enough. And, you know, unfortunately, you know, governments in a lot of places have the force behind them, you know, with militaries and with police and so forth. But you know, it really does take people just waking up and, you know, realizing that there's another agenda with all of that, and it's not for our best interest.
Yeah.
So anyway, the next thing I want to cover.
Sorry, if 1 million people hit the streets, what are they going to do?
Right. Exactly. And it's happening in a lot of places. So anyway, I find this shape of river all over the place. So this is in Brisbane, Australia. This is the Red River in Winnipeg, Manitoba. This is a river in Honduras, the Rio Platano. The Washita River in Monroe, Louisiana. And this is a little creek, I guess, in Chebogue, Nova Scotia. And these were all rivers that I found in my research on the alignments. But this is 5 examples of dozens and dozens and dozens. The River Thames.
Yeah. Do you find that there's always like a star citadel on the pointy bit and and then across the river you find another one as well? I mean, obviously a lot of them are gone, but
and I'm going to go over that. But yeah, I mean, the star forts. Many cases are connected with waterways. And as a matter of fact, you see this going on with river confluences where this is in Iowa, the Raccoon River and the Des Moines River. This is in Sudan with the Blue Nile and the White Nile, and this is the Mississippi and Missouri River in near St. Louis, Missouri, and it's it's the same configuration. Where I'm seeing two canals are coming together. I mean, is nature going to?
Oh, they're coming together. They're not splitting.
Yeah.
They're coming together.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or so you've got the main river here, but you've got these two rivers here, but you've got the identical configuration. Again, all over the world. I can give you more examples than three. Where again, this is another reason that I've come to the conclusion that these are canal systems. I mean, again, is nature going to have that almost the exact same look replicated all over the world? I mean, it just, but we're not taught anything different.
Interesting. We're not told to look, and when we do, we're told we're stupid. So, I mean, that's what school is, right? It's unless you parrot back what the teacher tells you, you're wrong. Go stand in the corner, and if you argue, you're going to the headmasters. How dare you not believe everything I say to you? So they try and teach us not to question. But some of us,
critical thinking has been gone from education for quite some time.
It's indoctrination.
That's right. Be autodidactic, people. Self-education is the way forward.
Sorry for running off. I got an emergency call from my girlfriend that someone was stalking her as she was walking home from the train station from work. But she luckily carries a taser with her and zapped it, and the guy effed off, so she's all good now. But that's why I disappeared there.
No worries. I'm glad she's okay.
Jeez.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
She says hello to both of you.
Crazy, man.
Say hi back.
Hello.
Hello. So this is where I get into batteries, and again, I'm making the connection between our everyday language and what their function actually was. So star forts are in many cases actually called batteries. And when I was following an alignment through lower and upper New York Bay, I found 4 pairs of star forts. And at the entrance to lower New York Bay, where the Atlantic Ocean is, you have Fort Hancock, most of which was destroyed after World War II by the U.S. Army. They took it down. It was deconstructed. So there's a little bit left of it, including a couple of batteries. And then Fort Tilden is across the bay's mouth here on the Rockaway Peninsula. Okay, so there's 1 pair of star forts. And then as you go up the way at the Verrazano Narrows, you have Fort Wadsworth on one side called Battery Weed. And then you have Fort Hamilton on the other side, on the Brooklyn side, which is a star fort, a little bit of a different shape. And this one's actually an active military base, which Fort Wadsworth isn't. The Statue of Liberty sits on top of a star fort called Fort Wood. This is Liberty Island. There used to be a star fort on Ellis Island called Fort Gibson. Excuse me. And then on up, there's Fort J on Governor's Island. And this was Fort Amsterdam, which is known as the Battery today. Okay. So a definition of a battery.
Governor.
Absolutely. So one definition of a battery is a device that produces electricity that may have several primary or secondary cells arranged in parallel or series, as well as a battery source of energy which provides a push or a voltage of energy to get a current flowing in a circuit. Okay, so I think that's what these were doing. They were batteries, actual batteries in this in the circuitry of the Earth's grid system. And they're all over the world.
And literally working with the components.
Okay, so that's one example of how it's like right in front of our eyes, right? In our language, we take it for granted. This is the definition of a battery. Okay, there's these little things we put in our devices. And then I find lighthouses in concert with star forts. And so I'm speculating that they're drawing down cosmic energy to charge the star fort batteries or some kind of function like that. Again, this was a very sophisticated civilization. They knew what they were doing. Even though there's not always a star fort with a lighthouse, they would have known the physics, depending on what these were. So, terms like entrainment and entanglement and harmonics and, things like that. I'm just throwing out some ideas. Because I'm sure that lighthouses were more than what we were told they were.
Absolutely. And
they don't make sense.
How they claim
and even if they do, how did they build the ones in the ocean?
Exactly, right? Like
Sorry,
the
Ben.
bricks off of islands in the middle of nowhere where they're having to build the foundation like a couple 100 feet up from the ocean floor, even on lots of them. And they're claiming they were made in like the 17, 18, some even in the 1600s. And then it's like, how were they even powered back then that you're claiming that they're that old? It's just like you say, Michelle, once you see how things are hidden in plain sight, everything becomes so apparent and you start questioning everything. And 95% of what we were taught in school does not compute,
Exactly. And I'm going to back up to I'm going to back up to star forts for a moment, because I know Cambell did a piece on Fort Jefferson at Key West. Do you want to talk about that, Cambell?
That was my very first video. Fort Jefferson, yeah, Key West. The largest red brick building in the USA is 60 million bricks plus, is it? I believe. Sitting on an atoll, 200 miles, I think, from land, something like that. And built as defense, because I think what happened, I think it had a big magnet in it, and then they just put magnets in all the other ships so that when they sailed in, they had to come close enough for them to be able to shoot them. They couldn't sail around it because it's a fort, right? And you can actually still see the canal around it, and it's under the ocean. It looks like it's covered in coral now, but the canal's under. It's bizarre. But yeah, good story. Cool story.
Yeah, it's supposed to be made of millions of bricks, New England bricks. And it's like the furthest west of the Florida Keys.
All there from ballast. The story is that there was all the ships dumping their ballast bricks off on the way through or something. 60 million of them.
With random bricks while sailing across the ocean, right?
Right. So again, the stories don't add up.
It's a good story, isn't it?
And so there's Fort Jefferson, and then Key West itself has several star forts. But then again, once you start looking at the phenomenon of star forts, you find them all over the place. The Gulf Coast,
that whole
the Florida
area
coast,
is
they're everywhere.
There you go.
So these are some of the lighthouses I'm sorry, go ahead.
How do they build? And sorry, just quickly. Also, Statue of Liberty was originally a lighthouse, correct?
That's in here.
Yeah, Michelle mentioned that about 10 minutes ago.
That's in there too, yeah.
No, well, I mentioned that it was on top of a star fort, but when I was doing the research for this, I did not know this. It served as a lighthouse from 1886 to 1902. I didn't know that.
And that whole story is just like, what is it? Some guy in France built it, and then and gave it to the US, and they towed it across the ocean behind a boat. That's the story of the Statue of Liberty. I mean, come on.
Well, there's that. Well, I've seen pictures where it was supposed to have been built in sections. I get a kick out of the stories about how I get a kick out of the stories about how.
Sorry.
No, I was just going to say the obelisks the Cleopatra's Needle in London and Paris and New York.
Yeah.
Ridiculous stories about how they got there.
Just float them down the river on a barge. Come on, it doesn't weigh that much. Just push it
So
over,
the
she'll be
Pasha
right.
of Egypt decided to give away all of these obelisks. You know, it's like,
Why not? He was a friendly
So
guy.
you know, so it's like the fact that
200
they were already there. They have to, you know, come up with some kind of concoction to explain how they got there instead of, oh, okay, well, these were already there.
This is the thing, because this is the splitting up, isn't it? Of there were all these different cultures, and we were all separate, and you know, so Rome had its architecture, and Egypt had its pyramids and obelisks, and you know, whatever country had this architecture. But then, you know, people start going, hang on, what's this obelisk and what's this building? It's like, oh yeah, well, it was moved on a barge, or that was you know, revisional architecture. You know, they were just building the exact same thing because they liked it. You know, just 500 years later. It's just, I mean, when you look at the story, it's literally like you're talking to someone stupid and they're just coming up with the first ideas that come into their heads. It was just copycat. They just towed it. I mean, it's just silly. It's just silly.
Right. And
they've
you know,
obviously
and we
spent all their time on changing our story and not enough on the past.
Mm-hmm. And we don't question it, because why would we be lied to? You know, it doesn't even enter our minds. This, you know, this is, the whole civilization's been hidden from us by omission and deception and fabrication. And so we live in it, we walk by it, we don't ask questions because we haven't been taught about it.
That's what I think is the biggest clue, that they're not us. Humans don't do this kind of stuff. We don't think about this kind of stuff. We don't want to start wars. We don't, you know, humans are completely different, but clearly whoever's, you know, ruling at the moment, they're not us. They don't have human traits.
They're not us at all.
It's clear as day.
They don't like us. They only want our energy. They want what they can get out of us. So, and again, these lighthouses, you've got lighthouses like this here in New York Bay. This is a tall one on Staten Island. And this is Fort Wadsworth in New York Bay with a lighthouse, and Statue of Liberty. And then you cross over to the other side of the United States to California and San Francisco, and you've got the same setup in San Francisco Bay at Fort Point with a lighthouse on top of what looks like Fort Wadsworth in New York. You know, it's just basically the same design, same idea. And you
all
have
the citadels seem to be the same design of red brick with the arches, the multi-levels with the arches, you know, and they're either pentagons or hexagons or whatever. They're all the same.
In many cases, it's like they have different models of star forts. They probably had different functions.
I think it kind of, or could tie into you know, with the alchemy and the domes and the different symbols and things being I guess in a certain place, so they're affected by different energies. So something might be built on the, you know, fractal structure, if you want to say, of, you know, the orbit of Mercury, or another one might be on the sun, and another one might be, you know, for the equinox in a certain place. So it's like you say, it's like they almost had a book, and it's like, oh, okay, this is a Mercury retrograde position. Okay, this is the plan, this is the geometry we use, and it'll tie into that natural energy.
Right, and I'll show you more examples of that here just in a moment. So you've got these batteries. They're actually called batteries next to Fort Point on one side of the Golden Gate Bridge. And on the other side of the Golden Gate Bridge, you have another battery Spencer, and then you have a lighthouse beneath the Golden Gate Bridge called the Lime Point Lighthouse. And then you have a lighthouse on Alcatraz Island. And when I was doing the research in San Francisco Bay, I realized there was a relationship between this lighthouse and the lighthouses on either end of the Bay Bridge, San Francisco Bay Bridge, Golden Gate Bridge, I'm sorry. So you've got a triangulated relationship.
But you've also got a battery on each side of the bridge, right? Bridging the gap. That's another electrical term, like the gap, isn't it? Bridging the, like a spark gap, which no doubt you're going to go into. I just thought I'd bring that up. I'm just going to grab a quick coffee too. I'll be back. Keep going.
Sure. And I don't know the answer to this, and Bernie, I don't know if you have an idea about it, but it makes me wonder about the original functions that these bridges had as well.
Right.
Because there's some very old bridges.
And there's lots of images of the bridges having structures on them when they're that old as well between these forts in lots of those old maps. So I personally believe, like we were discussing last time, how we believe they're most likely getting their energy out of the water movement. Chances are the bridges in the islands were some sort of hydro energy generation. And the picture, if you don't mind scrolling up to the last batteries, couple more there, yeah, right there. So those are extremely thick, cemented or blocked, circular. They look like cooling ponds from nuclear plants that have just been filled in, essentially, is what the quote unquote batteries actually look like, right? So it definitely was some sort of power generation or energy generating devices and technology that they pretty much just covered up with the facade over top as we moved in and reclaimed everything, right?
So this battery here would be about somewhere around in here. So it's on this side of the Golden Gate Bridge.
I'd be willing to bet that there's underground tunnels from below those batteries to somewhere along the bridge, if not even underneath the bridge, that exist that have been long lost, and most likely in lots of them. And that every ancient city we still have around, it's acknowledged if it's over like 300 years old that there's underground cities still below each city. So who knows how developed and advanced it really is below all of these places and the original infrastructure, right?
And just a thought, I mean, when I see the base of the bridge, I mean, that's huge.
And that's all steel too. So that's a giant charge differential, right? Like it'd be like connecting ground energy. And then going through the water, that's pulling in the current through the water is creating charge as well through those steels. So if it was the steel going directly in, that's actually a huge electromagnetic differential that our academic system has completely erased magnetic current out of current teachings and current physics and electrical engineering. And there's just as much magnetic current as there is electrical current, but it operates a little differently in the electron flow and the field flow than electricity does. So it's on different hertz frequencies than or current amp frequencies than what electricity is. So it's a lot harder to pick up, as well as it's like analog computer, like binary code, but how you have like the ones and zeros, but the switches in original analog computers, and those are based off of magnetic current, and it's a circle. I'm gonna have to do a complete teaching as well as refreshing myself with the electromagnetic circuitry, but that magnetic current doesn't go in a straight line sort of thing. It goes in circle upon chains, essentially. And that it's like a little impulse and then it switches and switches. But a lot of those old bridges that are made out of steel, they are chains as opposed to cables. And that is definitely something that needs to be investigated, and most likely how they were getting a large portion of their electricity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an integrated system, and we'll give some more examples here. So moving on down, I have several examples of this triangulation. I also consistently find lighthouses with astronomical alignments. So what we're just saying about Mercury makes a lot of sense as well. But it's typically lunar or solar alignments, where it's perfectly positioned over the top of the lighthouse. I really like that one, like right dead center.
Right.
And then, there's our Statue of Liberty lighthouse with the sun on top of the torch.
And how did we possibly engineer and construct that when they claim we did with the technology that they claim they did, right? Like, it's just so preposterous. It blows my mind.
But
Like,
you can't convince me that this is all random.
right?
I'm not there.
But that's
this is intentional.
The mathematic probability, statistics. It's like, if you understand math, you're absolutely right in saying that it's not by chance, that it's actually mathematically impossible that it's by chance, and as more people get exposed to this information and it keeps coming out, we are reaching that point of like no return or collective the 12 monkey sort of thing of math.
100th monkey.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, a lot of this, the information, it was easy to put together for me because I'd already done a lot of research in the course of 3 years. So I had already found these examples, and this is on the Isle of Alderney in the Channel Islands off the coast of France, which is a British. There's a name for it. I want to say it's like a protectorate or crown colony or something like that. And the Channel Islands are absolutely fascinating. It's filled. They are all filled with star forts and tidal islands, where it's like Mont Saint Michel is a great example. Mont Saint Michel is on the mainland, but it's a tidal island, and that's where there's a causeway that connects the island of Mont Saint Michel with the coast of, or with France, but then at high tide it's covered over. And the Channel Islands
there's one off the coast of Africa that's almost the same as well.
Off the coast of where?
Africa, down sort of, it's on the east coast, down sort of southeast coast. Can't remember exactly where.
Canary Islands or no?
Well, it's on Africa. It's like just off the coast, like it's like a tidal island off, but it's sort of inland from Madagascar sort of area.
Okay, so it's on the other side. So anyway, these tidal islands are amazing, and they are physically connected by a man-made causeway to the land. The island to the land.
Okay.
Yeah, so the causeways are man-made. So there's some kind of function. I would love to know what it was with these tidal islands, because the ancients sure put a lot of energy into creating that effect of, low tide and high tide. Let me move this here real quick. So,
I mean, maybe that's an energy variant. Do we know if the islands? I mean, I guess it's hard to tell, but do they look man-made or natural? Like, do you think they built the whole thing, or just found the islands and sort of converted them?
I think they probably built the whole thing, but that's just me. And I'm showing you Mont Saint Michel because it's a great example. And off the top of my head, I can't think of the names of the ones on the Channel Islands, but I can tell you I found a bunch of them when I was doing the research. So low tide, you can actually get across. Let's see.
And
there's a way across. There's a
it
it's
looks
called a
so much
causeway.
like all the mounds we see, like all the mounds that we see that look all, you know, smashed and buried. They look so much like that, don't they? You know, like that was what they originally were, something like Mont Saint Michel, and they just got hit with something.
And it's the same thing. St. Michael's Mount in Cornwall is also one. Same idea. So I'm just saying this because I would love to know what this represented, because I really don't know what it represents, but
Wow.
it represents something.
Absolutely.
Would it be something to do with a differential? Do you think, Bernie, like a
Oh,
you know, a current
100%
differential
it
with
does.
rising?
Yeah, just because the current of that salt water tides moving in and out, if they had like the grounding cables going through that whole area, that's a huge electron flow charge in creating in that grounding differential for your circuit. And then having like connected to your spire at your peak in the center of the Starfort Cathedral there, the two different differentials from the sea and from the atmosphere will create a giant charge, and all you'd need is a Bell circuit step up transformer, and you have your electricity.
Okay.
So that's almost along the lines of when you were talking about the boats and dragging an anchor in the salt water and having a spire on the mast and creating a differential.
You got it.
Wow.
Okay.
Cool.
And I'm just pulling up the Apollo Athena energy lines through Europe, which starts in Skellig Michael, which is in Ireland, and it goes through St. Michael's Mount. The second one I showed you in Cornwall, Mont Saint Michel, the first tidal island I showed you. And then this line goes all the way to Jerusalem. This particular line is called the Apollo Athena energy lines. And I think I first learned about that in a book called 12 Tribe Nations, the Sacred Number in the Golden Age.
Jump in there, interesting names. Apollo, Apol, Athena, Ethereal. I don't know, just throwing it out there.
So anyway, there's a ley line connection there with those, at least those two tidal islands, and you know, like I said, there's definitely something going on there because the Channel Islands are full of them.
And so,
okay,
so if they were high and low tides at different times, they'd be opposite poles, wouldn't they? Is that correct?
No, the tidal cycle is directly related to the position of the moon as the moon moves around the plane of Earth. And so when you're at high tide, you have the moon directly above. When you have low tide, the moon's on the opposite side.
Right, so it's more to do with like electromagnetic pull and yeah, okay.
So to bring it back to my original subject, the other thing that the Channel Islands is full of are star forts, and that was what drew my attention there. I saw a map of the Isle of Alderney where this is located, and it was like star forts all around the edges of the map. And so I made a mental note and really jumped into it in a series. And so you have the lighthouse in this particular location, and then the two star forts here just off the coast, and you know, another triangulated relationship. And then the island of Bermuda had a lot of historical star forts, as well as Fernando de Noronha off the coast of Brazil, and the Channel Islands would be about here. So all three of these places have a lot of star forts. Bernie, can you talk a little bit about triangles in this capacity?
So what I was just connecting in my mind as you're doing that, thanks for bringing that up, is that it looks like it's just fractal, like micro fractals and macro fractals within the geometric framework of the Earth grid, and that since the Earth grid is tetrahedral, that's triangles within triangles, and that it would make sense that in certain positions, especially with alignments of where the other heavenly bodies are, that when you're pulling in macro energy from the galactic plane into the Earth plane, that certain spots would, and like triangulation as well, like you hear with when they're using to track a cell phone, you need 3 spots of information, 3 spots of energy, so that would make sense that why you have them everywhere, of just focusing in certain energies and bringing it in from the macro to the micro and the micro to the macro.
Okay.
Do we know,
I know.
are they certain types of triangle as far as like equilateral and isosceles, and or are they just
I was looking at that right now through as Michelle was going, and it looks like there's a couple different types. Sorry, Michelle, please.
That's what I'm finding, is there's different types.
Okay.
So there's equilateral, there's isosceles. I did some when I was in the Army back in the 1980s. I was in signals intelligence, and I remember the term triangulation from pinpointing where signals were coming from. So I'm familiar with the term in that use, but it makes sense that it connects somehow.
Yeah, and so it's triangulation because they need the 3 points to calculate it. If you only have 2, you're not able to get the width or like the length sort of thing. You're only able to get 1 spot of it, where with the 3 points, this triangle, you're able to get all information or all energy readings, all waves from the 3-dimensional plane. So,
okay, got it. So one other thing about the Channel Islands before I go, and I've got a lot more to cover in here, so I better speed it up a little bit, but just little interesting tidbits that I found when I was doing the research. The Channel Islands were occupied by the Nazis almost the entirety of World War II. So from like 1940 to 1945, they were occupied by the Germans. And basically the British government just opened the door and let them walk on in. And on Alderney, there were concentration camps, work camps. The island in the Channel Islands that had the least involvement was the Isle of Sark, because of the Dame of Sark. I guess had a pretty good handle on the Germans, but all the other places were really hit heavily by that. And Norway was another country, as well as Denmark, that were occupied by Nazi Germany for almost the entirety of World War II. So, there's definitely a story in there. And when you think about the historical location of Atlantis would have been in this area. So I have a feeling that they were really interested in the technology there. What they tell us is that they were building the Atlantic Wall.
What's the Atlantic Wall?
Which is ridiculous, because they go through building this massive infrastructure supposedly to keep the some kind of defensive thing going on is what was supposed to have been going on here. And then Normandy happened, and they just kind of ran over the beaches and forget the Atlantic Wall. That was, I mean, like I said, the story just falls apart immediately when you look into it. Sorry, I'm getting off track. So this is the Isle of Wight, the Needles Lighthouse, and Marconi carried out his first experiment here in 1897 to 1900 with the telegraph. So why did he pick this a location? One of the reasons was possibly that the beach here is pure white silica, and there may have been other reasons on the grid that was chosen for the wireless experiments. And this is the Old Needles battery right here, and there's a tunnel underneath that leads to the searchlight emplacement. And again, you have a direct relationship between the Old Needles battery, searchlight, and the lighthouse. And I'm going to go ahead and move on. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. I found a relationship, and again, I think once you start looking into this, you'll find it all over the place. This is Heathrow Airport in London, and this is Shepherd's Bush, where White City was located, and there used to be a big stadium there, the Olympic Stadium, that turned into a Greyhound racetrack later on. In Tampa, Florida, this is Tampa International Airport, and this is Sulphur Springs, and there's a track there that used to be a Greyhound racing track. And so I kind of picked up that there seemed to be this relationship that they're really not that far apart, less than 10 miles, and I'm not sure what the kilometers would be, all over the place. And I was doing this series where I was researching places that commenters had left, and so I started getting a lot of suggestions. Look at Montreal, look at Philadelphia, look at Los Angeles, look at Sydney, and it's all the same. There's like an international airport, a big airport, and then a short angular distance away, there's some kind of track. It could be a stadium, it could be a Greyhound racing track, a horse racing track. In Sydney, this is the Royal Randwick thoroughbred racetrack, high stakes, high dollar purse. And again, you have that all over the place. I haven't even looked at all of the places I've been left yet. And then invariably, I was finding a connection to major sports stadiums as well when I was doing this research. In Toronto, there's an airport here, and then it goes right through where the CN Tower is, as well as the major sports venues down here next to the water. So I was finding these repeating patterns, and then when I was doing research in Nashville, I found the Starfort Negley with a baseball stadium and railroad yards, and I'm thinking, what's the baseball stadium doing there? And so I think that was part of another type of circuit on the grid system. And then I was seeing connections between star forts, where star forts were located. And so this was a star fort that no longer stands in Pensacola, and Pensacola has a number of star forts as well. It used to stand right here, and down here is where the railroad yards are. Okay, so when I saw that graphic of the railroad yards, it brought to mind, this electrical circuitry.
Big time.
Okay.
Macro processors is what it all is adding up to look like, and probably is.
Have you done any distance measuring at all, Michelle? Like as far as how far the circuits are away from airports, etc.? Or Is there any
Well,
correlation?
in the examples I gave, yes, and that's why I say they were a short distance away. All of the ones that I was looking at, or at least there was at least one that was a short distance away. And then in the bigger picture, like in Copenhagen in Denmark, I found a lot of star forts and racetracks and things like that. But again, it was like in that direction from the major airport, the Kastrup airport. So then you get into the word circuit. Okay, so I think ellipses were being used as racing tracks, and they were components of the circuitry of the Earth's electromagnetic grid system at one time. Not necessarily being used as racetracks.
No, well, it's that the corners would speed up, current or movement. That's what they normally do. You sort of speed up around those curves. But also circuit, when we look at the ancient world, we get circuses, which are the same thing, very similar word.
Right. Hippodromes is another one. So you get several definitions of circuit, and one is the actual name of the course. And it's the number of times the racers go around the track. It's the itinerary of racing events, so the racing circuit for the year. And then in bicycle racing, it's a mass start road cycle race that consists of several laps of a closed circuit, and the length of the lap is slightly longer each time. And so the electrical circuit is a closed path in which electrons from a voltage or current source flow, and includes devices that give energy to the charged particles the current is comprised of, such as batteries and generators. So again, I think these circuits were actual circuits, and they're telling us they were circuits without telling us about the original grid system. And then, you have
just that movement through the ether must create some kind of energy that,
Right.
Sorry.
As the bigger circuits are major venues, for people, for money, for excitement. So I definitely think they're utilizing that for their gain.
Yeah. Well, and what do people say when they come out of, watching a good football game at the Oval? Oh, the atmosphere was electric. It was charged.
This is the Indianapolis Raceway or Motor Speedway. It's the largest sports venue in the world, said to have been constructed in 1909. And inside it would fit Vatican City, the Wimbledon campus, the Coliseum, the Rose Bowl, Yankee Stadium, and the Kentucky Derby. And it's called an automobile racing circuit.
Nice
so
key.
It's pretty big. Right over here. Oh, you got star forts going on in there with Vatican City.
That's actually the Vatican. Okay. Sorry, now I've got the. I thought that's actually Vatican City. Okay. Yeah. Wow, that's a big circuit.
Yep.
Wow, that's Vatican City is a circuit like that.
Well, no, the Vatican, all of these.
You're comparing.
I
see.
Fit inside of it. It's so big.
Inside it.
Okay. So again, I think they're harvesting energy from that with their bedding and
the emotional energy guaranteed, right? And you see all the old Colosseums as well from the old age, and they're made of silica. They're made of the quartz, which is your resonating. And then they all had like their metal roofing and the metal ornate decorations, but that's actually your circuitry, as well as the chains, the fencing, all of that's also your electrical circuitry. And I think we talked about this a little bit before, maybe just in private, Michelle, but that it's emotional energy harvesting that these negative parasite beings are harvesting from us. And if you think of like now, yes, it's like when you're at these sporting events, there's the loss of like people that lose gambling or their team lost, but then also the positive energy of those that won. But then in the old world, it was the gladiators, where you'd have the ultimate fear of people fighting for their lives, and then everybody with their emotions of the shock, the awe, the cheering, whatever was going on. If that even happened, we don't even know, but that's how the story goes. But it's that there are these macro circuit boards that are for some higher dimensional soul, emotion, energy harvesting.
Yeah. And there's definitely something going on with it.
They would have been sorry. I was going to say, you can imagine they would have been more for like singing and resonance and gathering that way, but now it's all about competition, and they've got to create that friction and that that opposition to each other to get people charged, right? Get them charged up.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely being used in a different way than it was originally, I think. And I'm going to scroll down through that. I covered that more last week. And I do want to point out that trolley systems were everywhere, literally everywhere. Railroad service and trolley cars.
I laugh every time I see a picture of a horse pulling one, right? Because it's like, oh yes, you guys had this industry to lay all these rail lines, and that you had these trolleys that were working on free wireless electricity, and now all of a sudden you're back to a horse pulling it.
Right. So that's I think that was part of the restart.
Absolutely.
Downhill.
They needed something to power the streetcar with until they could get it electrified after they dug it out. So that's how I see that. So this is at Saratoga Springs right here. I'm sorry.
On Indiana, There's that one in the middle of the Amazon is ridiculous.
Yeah. So Saratoga Springs had a trolley at one time. West Baden Springs in Indiana had a trolley car, and the largest bicycle track in the country, which was said to have been nearly demolished by a windstorm in July of 1925. And the owner received an insurance check for $100,000, so he tore it down, and it was gone by the fall of 1925. So much for that, right? Didn't want that around.
Right. And it's that every one of these stories is the same. And now that once you see it with like clear vision or the different perspective, it's just like, wow, how did we actually fall for this for so long, right? And it's that they were able to just manipulate the human psyche to turn on each other through trauma cycles and distract as they hid the truth and reburied it, burnt it all down, blew it all up, and kept what they could for themselves. But it's like you point out, Michelle, like these trolley systems were literally everywhere, but in the smallest of towns and municipalities, in the most remotest of places, and at the earliest of times, which just from a logical perspective does not make sense whatsoever. And also, as you point out, how, this was built and it was built in 10 years, and then they used it for 1 year, and then they tore it down because they didn't have a use for it anymore, right? Like, it's
definitely something along those lines.
But they replaced it with something.
So when you think about the massive deconstruction that took place to get rid of these trolley car systems, replace them with cars and trucks, replace them with, insurance, where people can go wherever they want, but then they end up going places they probably shouldn't go. They end up in accidents that they would never have been in the first place if this original transportation system was still in place. That benefits the 1%, the Fords and the Standard Oils and all the people that wanted to monetize the resources. So they got these original rail and streetcar infrastructure up long enough until they could get their own form of transportation in there that they could make a lot of money on.
That's a very good
Yeah,
point.
monetized.
And how the
Mm.
public transportation that was already everywhere, that benefits the connectivity of society, where these individual vehicles promotes the isolation and individuality of a population instead of that community mass transportation and connectedness.
Yeah, but it's even more than that, and I'll go into that in just a moment. I'm just going to race through this, but again, you have the same thing in Hot Springs, Arkansas. You have the airport, you have this big racing track, horse racing track. You have streetcars. And I think there was a connection to the word to springs and spring in a system like that. And again, I don't know the exact connection, but it could have been any one of these definitions. And when I was doing research a couple of years ago on the correlations between railroads, canals, and star forts, I mean, I found tons of them. And I found this picture of the railroad terminal at the Gare d'Orsay in Paris in 1900 that had electric trains. And I looked up the word terminal, and one of the definitions, besides being the end of a railroad or transport route, is a point of connection for closing an electric circuit. So the correlations to electrical circuitry with all of this continue. And these are some of the older railroad stations. So the Cincinnati Union Terminal still stands, and it's just amazing. And this is the largest half dome in the Western Hemisphere. Still in use as an Amtrak station. This is in Belgium. And I want to point out these windows like this, and I'll show you another example here in just a moment. I think it serves the same function as like the cathedral rose windows.
You nailed it.
But I'll go into that in just a moment. The Madrid terminal in Spain. And this is a train station in Mumbai that looks like a cathedral. You know, on the inside looks like a cathedral. Okay. These train stations are no longer standing. So the Pennsylvania station in Manhattan was said to have been built between 1905 and 1910 and demolished in 1963. You know, like what you were saying. I mean, why build a beautiful building like that to demolish it 53 years later?
That thing was huge as well. It was so big.
Like, at least sell it off for pennies for industry that someone would move in and do a factory, right? Like, even if you gave it away for someone to use, it would be more productive than putting resources in to destroy a productive build, like, infrastructure that you already have, right? It's opposite land. It makes no sense at all.
And this story is over and over again. This was the Atlanta terminal station in Atlanta, Georgia, opening in 1905 and demolished by 1972. The Birmingham terminal station in Alabama, completed in 1909 and demolished in 1969. They didn't want these old train stations around. This one was said to have been built in 1873 and demolished by 1907. You know, you have the old, whatever those were used for.
Right. I'm still trying to wrap my mind around that. And
that are no longer there.
You'll notice there's a lot of aerials and antennas in any of the generational pictures that have poles like that. And there's no wires usually, but everywhere has antennas on the buildings and the iron metal railings around all like the domes. And then you'll see those sort of crosses, and majority of the time never have wires in them. So that's something else I'm still trying to figure out. Yep. And I love that you made the connection with how instantly I saw the same glass windows in those terminals as cathedrals, right? And how they're actual, those are frequencies. Those are actual Hertz frequencies in a two-dimensional form. That what we call sacred geometry, those are actually cymatic wave illustrations in a two-dimensional form and then when you actually put it into sound, it turns into the three-dimensional energy. So that's actually a code and a language of sound and energy whenever you see those windows or those forms or those shapes.
Right. And I have some examples of exactly what you're saying that I'll go over here in just a moment. So this is a list. If you just look up on Wikipedia, and you'll see the demolished railway stations and this is just in the United States. So this is a small sliver worldwide. And then there's trams and trolleys showing up in unlikely places like the middle of the Amazon rainforest in Manaus, Brazil in the 1800s, which is ridiculous because there wasn't even a road connection there supposedly until 1973. And it's called the worst road in Brazil that's impassable when it rains. So they want us to believe that all of this was built.
What year?
In the mid 1800s. So the
what
road
year was flight discovered?
I'm sorry?
What year was flight discovered? Like the Wright brothers or whatnot?
Oh yeah, it was like 1900, early 1900s.
So no roads, no airplanes, and in the middle of the Amazon jungle.
Yeah, so you just have the Amazon River, and this is near Manaus. So how were they supposed to build all of that under the conditions that would have existed according to the history that we've been taught? And you go all over the world, and the trams are all the same all over the world. It's the same style. So this is in Edinburgh, and this is in Hong Kong, and this is in Alexandria in Egypt. Like I said, Hobart in Tasmania had a tram system from 1893 to 1960. And then trolley parks are a whole nother subject. I mean, they were at the end of streetcar lines, and I think they were serving some kind of, enhanced energy generation for the grid.
Lots of them were built onto the ocean or onto the waterways, correct? Like there weren't just solely, right? Yeah. So that would be energy harvesting from the water going through the architecture into the grid.
So this is like electric park in Kansas.
Like Ferris wheels and carousels as well, which could have been machinery of some kind.
Yeah, like you see down there in the middle of that picture, right to the bottom left of the second tower on the right-hand side.
The two columns.
The big circle with the spires. And if you look at a lot of the old pictures of Ferris wheels, they don't actually have the seats on them or the chairs on them, and it's just a big spire. And it's got to be some sort of mass electrical energy or wind generator, some sort of the previous resets.
And you have the same story.
That city in Uzbekistan, that brand new city they've built that looks that's got a Ferris wheel in it, but the Ferris wheel's indoors, so you don't get a view from it. It's like, come on, guys.
It looks like a massive, giant electromagnetic generator or just DC motor. Yeah, exactly. Sorry, Michelle. Please continue.
Okay. So this was Electric City in Kansas City, Missouri, and it was supposed to have been the inspiration for Walt Disney for his theme parks when he was a young boy. And it was said to have been built in 1907 and closed in 1925. And again, this is a recurring story because it was said to have burned to the ground. And that happened to a lot of these parks. Luna Park in Coney Island. There's Luna Park in Melbourne, right?
Yep.
So, and there's Luna Parks all over the world. But I've done most of my research on the trolley parks in the United States, and this is a list of the ones that are still operating, and then this is a list of the ones that are closed in the United States, and most of them were by fire, but it was other reasons they were demolished. They were gone. but I think they were providing some kind of enhanced energy generation, and they were providing the local communities with some kind of fun at the same time.
as well. Yeah.
And
And all the old ones tended to have the big roller coaster that went around the outside, like around the, the circuit, the outside of the park, didn't they? Those big old wooden roller coasters.
mm-hmm.
And
Right.
once again, we're talking about generating mass energy, emotional energy in the people, right? And in the kids and that go there.
Happiness,
and it just, they've repurposed it.
Real,
and they're still using the macro grid infrastructure of the old civilization, the world's old energy grid, but they've just, from what used to be positive, like we talked about cathedrals, where it would be healing energy coming in, where, healing the people and whatnot, where now it's used for, we hear all these stories of children being abused. It's documented in these same churches, right? And stuff like that, where there's some good energy, where like singing happy, and then there's like the angry preaching, and then there's like the trauma within it, so that they've not destroyed and taken apart these macro grids. They've just manipulated them to do the opposite functions, and they're still functioning to whatever the manipulators are.
Right. And in the case of these amusement
they
parks,
all have a ghost house. Oops. Like a horror house, the scary place.
and you add beer and alcohol consumption to a lot of these places, like Busch Gardens in the United States, Busch Beer. The electric park that I just showed you in Kansas City started out supposedly from a local brewery because they wanted to get people there to drink their product. There were 2 electric parks. This was the second one. So, again, you've got something else going on where, you're equating drinking with, the fun of going to an amusement park for the adults, at least as we would know it now. But, again, they're
a substance that causes ego and then also abuse, opposed to like a psychedelic where it'd be a spiritual sort of thing. And just I wanted to mention this quickly, Michelle, how you pointed out the East Indian Trading Company, and they were the first to start the opium wars and the opium trade. And my own experience, how we've talked, both Cambell and Michelle, about how I was on Oxycontin and opiates for 10 years through prescription through the doctors, which I'm now off for 2.5. But it's that those drugs, those downers, they lower your vibration and your consciousness to the lowest possible existence, and you can only truly understand it once you're on them. And that opium was the very first of the opiates, and that this East Indian Trading Company is what started it all and distributed it all and whatnot, and that it's been this exact same cycle of traumatization and abuse. And instead of all the tribes and the indigenous people throughout all of history, where your ritual or your adult rites is to take like a psilocybin mushroom or some sort of psychedelic and go on your spiritual journey at your coming of age or whatnot, and that it's the exact opposite of what is legal and what is pushed by the system and encouraged, and what completely destroys and kills humanity and our connectedness to each other, and continues the cycle of abuse and division and trauma, compared to what we call tribalistic and the least evolved people, but in fact are the most spiritually in touch and still connected to the energies of the earth and the living Gaia or Kashik or everything, and that they're the ones that still have that ingrained within their society. And we're looking at them thinking, wow, they're so devolved, and probably who knows, like they probably know everything and looking at us like just shaking their head still, right? But
Yeah.
It's that humanity has to come together and not judge, no matter where you are or what your beliefs were, but look at all of the similarities and the intuition you feel in your heart, and listening to your higher self and getting yourself on the highest vibrational frequencies, that we can relaunch whatever the global connected consciousness is. And don't hide within. Don't live in states of fear, sadness, anger, or hate. Live in love, light, and connectedness and honesty. And yeah, I will let you continue there. Sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, so if anybody's interested, look up the first Opium War and read all about that origin, because it's very real. It was intentionally brought in to do exactly what Bernard said. So I'm just going to scroll through this. This is this is where we end up with the pretzel congested roadway instead of the non-polluting and low-fare electric streetcar systems, which were no longer needed or wanted. Pretty good summary of our lives there, right? Tied into knots.
Yeah. And it's hilarious because now they've got to push the green agenda again, but clearly we had this all sorted out and free and no pollution, and they destroyed it. Now they're going, oh, look, no, it's your fault. It's your fault. You're all killing the planet. Yeah, right.
The first automotives, the first trains, the first trolleys, all the original infrastructure that we have images and documentation were all running on electricity. They were all electric. And now it's like we're somehow being told 100 years later, 150 years later, oh, we're just learning this now. And no.
A lot of inconsistencies.
We're just learning how to monetize this now, is what they're saying.
So the next thing are incline railways. And in places like Pittsburgh, there were like, let's see, Pittsburgh had a whole bunch of them, and there's only 2 left. And Cincinnati had 5, and there's no left. But there are some that are still functioning today. So Lookout Mountain in Chattanooga, Tennessee, which was said to have been constructed in 1895. And this is also known as a funicular. So it's a transportation system that uses cable-driven cars to connect points along a steep incline. And it uses 2 counterbalance cars connected to opposite ends of the same cable. So it sounds like a pretty sophisticated technology.
But
and not only, and not only that, it's, how'd they build that? Especially this one. This is in Hastings, England. I mean, that's like rough cut, right? So, and there's other functioning, other functioning incline railways and funiculars, but not nearly what there used to be. And this is incline road on the Isle of Portland. So, a lot of them ended up being pulled out, and remember them in the name of the road. I'm just I've made connections with the underground subway systems with the electrical circuitry chart. The colors are the same that you would find in a chart, and I think they were probably functioning as electrical circuits in their own right, as well as in the Earth's grid system. And again, you have the same basic structure all over the world. And just a few examples. And there are countless abandoned subway tunnels. So this one's in London, one of the many. This one's in Hungary. And this was in Glasgow, Scotland. And the subway system in Glasgow, which goes in opposite directions, reminded me of like a particle accelerator. And so this kind of interesting implications there.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Wow.
I wonder what's on top of that. What buildings are on top of it? That'd be interesting.
I'll give you some homework, Cambell.
Yeah, and how old was it made?
You got some names right there. I'll send you the graphic. But there again, you have the River Clyde, and
cool.
going right through the middle of it, the River Clyde. And I said earlier, it's a canal also. It's got masonry banks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Everywhere. And Olaf the Sverker, he's a very small starting out YouTube channel, but he's a Russian descent living in Scotland, and he's done some really, really good videos showing this giant Great Wall that runs all the way through Ukraine and then all of the way through Siberia. And it's way bigger, way more massive than the Great Wall of China. And it's like literally every 2 miles, there's a star fort built into it that's like just underground. And it's like right there, that rewrites history. Where did that come from? Who built it? When did it exist? And matches it to every other one that's in the world that they lie about and can't explain.
Exactly.
Mm.
So I think my last part of this is just the idea of cathedrals as diodes. And at first I was focusing on the cathedral aspect of it. And when I was doing the research for this, I realized that we were really talking about a diode. Because the cathode is the so a diode is a semiconductor device with two terminals that conducts current in one direction primarily. An electrode is an electrical conductor used to make contact with a non-metallic part of a circuit. The cathode of the electrode is where the conventional current departs a polarized electrical device, and the anode electrode is where the conventional current enters the polarized electrical device. So you've got the spires bring the energy down, and then you've got the whole building laid out in a certain way, serving a certain function. And I'm talking about cathedrals, but I think it also applies to other buildings. You're talking about the railroad stations, but also like mosques and other similar, they're called churches, but they're the same idea.
Yeah.
So there's something going on with the cathedrals in that respect, and that you've got the window. I focused on the windows and the organ because that's what I know. Anything beyond that, like red mercury and stuff like that, I know about it, but it's secondhand for me. But I found this diagram of the axial ratio of two antennae when I was looking up information on elliptical polarization, and it brought to mind the cathedral window that looks like that right away. So I'm going to speculate that serves as an antenna.
That's not speculation. That is a waveguide generator. That is an antenna. There's no speculation at all. That's just fact.
So that's an antenna. This is a Walter Russell diagram showing the 6-octave working range that's identical to a cathedral door that are found all over the world. So I've got examples of New Caledonia, which is in the South Pacific, not far from Australia, Finland, England, and Manhattan. And the same idea. Talking earlier about the windows. So these are piano notes that look like the same as the cathedral rose windows. And so this is one of the solfeggio frequencies on the charts you sent me, Bernard. And this is the same number of petals in a window. And then you've got the organ, parked up right against that. So you said it was like a 2D representation of a frequency. And then you've got the organ like right up against it, so that whatever notes are coming from the organ are going through that window. And I talk about the solfeggio tones.
So that's a waveguide generator, the window structure there, that is the same shape dimension as the actual tone of piano sound being created right next to it. So that literally proves and scientifically shows that the sound wave being generated right there is the exact same as the code, same geometric hertz frequency cymatically as the window that's right next to it, that's made out of the metal and the crystals that are your both waveguide generator as well as magnifier with the crystal resonance. That's an analog machine of sound, energy amplification, and dimensional practice. That's insane. Mind-boggling.
And that would be to do with where it actually sits on the grid as well, wouldn't it? The actual frequency that it's set to.
I mean, I'm sure all of these buildings, all the organs, all of these rose windows, it must have been a symphony of frequencies that were doing good, you know, doing something wonderful.
Yeah, I mean,
and
if
you know, we've lost that.
Into the remember how many rhymes and fairy tales and that there used to be about bells, but they've all disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
There are still a lot that have bells, and the solfeggio frequencies themselves are healing. The suppression of solfeggios is a big problem for humanity. This is another style of exactly. This other style of cathedral window looks like atomic wave function, and this is another chart that Bernard sent me. So it looks like they served a different purpose than the solfeggio windows or the musical windows. And then I talk about an organ and what an organ means. You know, an organ is a collection of tissues that structurally form a functional unit, specialized to perform a particular function. So I'm guessing that there's a connection with what a musical organ is doing. It's performing a particular function. And they're, you know, incredibly sophisticated instruments, 3 keyboards, 30-note pedal keyboard, you know, all these stops. And then we talk about the bells. I think there's a connection. I think these are sending these frequencies out to the cosmos, these really tall bell towers. This is in Florida, the Block Tower. You know, again, there's a story that goes with it, how it came into existence, but it's like falls apart. This is another one called the Citrus Tower in Claremont, Florida. Hear the Carillon bells. Let's see. Elevator to the clouds. There we go. Elevator to the clouds. And they're kind of in alignment here in Florida. And I really think they were sending out these harmonious frequencies for the benefit of all of creation. I mean, that's my take on what's going on with these massive bell towers.
No, you're actually 100% right. I gotta think of his name, but he actually just did a huge presentation on Leak Project not too long ago about with the sound frequencies and the mathematical shapes and calculations, proving and claiming exactly what you just said, Michelle. It'll come to me. It will come to me.
There's bell towers all over the place.
Dr. Emoto's work almost proves it, you know, because he's showing that frequency,
Doretta,
you know, produces cymatics, and then he has like, you know, where he puts rice in water. Oh, I'm not sure if that's him, but people put like rice in water, and they'll get 2 beakers, and one they'll tell it they love it, and the other one they tell it they hate it, and the one they tell they hate, it just goes all gross, and the one they tell they love is just stays as clean water with rice in it. So it's the intention of the frequency that's creating the energy in that cup.
Yeah, so those are the happy ones. Let's see.
And that I love you. I mean, that's just right.
So there you go.
I mean, that's
love, and I will kill you.
I will kill you.
Yeah, so that's a really good point. Here's another one. It just loses its shape.
Look at food as well. I mean, all this processed food we get kind of looks, you know, a bit like that evil kind of picture, doesn't it? Where natural food is based around natural geometry, you know, whole foods, you know, like apples. The tourists.
Oh, the tourist.
So I'll end it here. This is the old Union Station in Louisville, Kentucky, which is still standing. It's not operating as a railroad station anymore, but it's still standing. So you know, it looks like a cathedral, and you've got a window going there. So I'm just seeing one gigantic interconnected system, and
that's a terminal. That building's a terminal, right?
Correct.
I mean, I'm just wondering, can they transfer different frequencies via train tracks from one place that naturally picks them up, and they transfer it down to a terminal and then play it out that window to actually transfer the frequency?
Oh, absolutely, and even more so through the silica and granite blocks. Those are the sound waveguide sound energy moves way more efficiently through those materials, as opposed to where electrical's going through minerals, sound is going through crystals. And that's something else that's not taught or that's been massively suppressed in understanding the magnetic current. And
then there's also piezoelectric in there as well.
Yes. Right before you go, Michelle, though, I just got to show you, it's David Soretta, and if I can share a screen here.
Yeah, I'm getting out. I think I'm out.
Just this one right here, you have to watch, because he proves the mathematics of exactly what you're intuitively figured out, that the pyramids, as well as all of the monoliths, were and are broadcasting solfeggio frequencies. So this one right here, it's quite the long video, but just secrets of the missing capstone, Jesus Christ, whatever. But the David Soretta on Leak Project, and he goes in somewhere with it specifically to that. He's also making these coils and doing experiments with putting solfeggio frequencies through them and whatnot. So yes,
you know,
by all means, if you have to go, do go. And if it's all right with you, that the blog that you have of the circuit world, I'm going to use some of the pictures of it and then connect it to my electrolysis alchemy cathode, anode, and whatnot. And I'll send that to you very soon.
Yeah.
And
when I was doing the research of that part of it, I was stumbling into your field of research with the electrolysis and all of that when I was doing the research to try to figure that out, because I don't have a background in it, but I kind of knew where to look.
Oh, absolutely. And it's like you're learning it, and like I guarantee by the time we're done our journey here, you're gonna know more electrical engineering than the average person with a degree.
No, I was just going to say that's how I came to the conclusion that humanity and society was way more advanced than anything we've ever been told. And I would love to time travel back and just be there for a day and just see how it all worked together, because I just know it was beautiful. It wasn't warlike, you know, they weren't fighting each other. There's no way they could have that level of coordination and integration all over the world if this civilization was at odds with each other. It would not even be possible.
And just look what we've found out with collaboration and working together, what we've uncovered just in the last year or two. You know, like together, where we get all the answers, we've got all the answers, we're strong. It's their only weapon is division, and that's, you know, playing with our thoughts to try and make us, you know, think that the neighbour's the enemy, when really I think we can all see who the enemy is at this point. So
yeah, and that's the only thing they're good at.
Beautiful thing.
It's the only thing they're good
exactly.
at. Because they're not
They only
good
have one
beings.
playbook.
And humanity's just so much
They are
better at
not.
building and coexisting than hurting and killing each other. We're not meant to do that. And it's a beautiful thing that now that people are all waking up, no matter what it's caused them to like see the lie within the mainstream narrative, it's that people from every division of our societies have now been exposed to something that has broken their trust in the institutions and have now been coming onto platforms like this and seeing everybody just figuring things out and the communities and the love and everything that's here. And there's no longer the resistance or the stigma or the mental blocks in their ego. Instead, it's they just listen and trust in yourself and your intuition, and it's a very beautiful thing. And I truly believe we've crossed the point of no return, that we are awakening and we're not going back to sleep anytime soon.
No, we are not.
Once you start seeing, you can't not see it.
Because they hid it in plain sight. And once you see it, it's in plain sight everywhere.
Plain sight, yeah, exactly. All right, we're at 2 hours, 20 minutes. So that was good. I thought maybe we'd have time for questions, but maybe next time we'll take some questions. Looks like you've got to go and give some hugs to the kitty cat there, Michelle. So we don't want to deprive the poor cat. Yeah, so thank you for joining us. Thank you, BurnEye. I'll put links to your guys' channels and websites and everything underneath. Yeah, and thank you everyone for joining us. Hope you enjoyed it, and we will be back next week with another live collaboration. So love you all. Stay awesome, and we'll talk to you all soon. Bye for now.
Good night, everybody.
Love and respect.